Welcome to Dan and Sarah Makers. Today I'm going to show you how to turn a coffee table into an ottoman by making a cover. And I'll go through the steps here and then check out RustiKate's channel for the finished product. Welcome to Dan and Sarah Makers. Today I'm going to do an upholstery project for RustiKate. So Katie has this coffee table that she wants to turn into a padded topped ottoman, and since we're using this rather nice leather type fabric, she doesn't feel like her home sewing machine would quite do it justice. So I'm going to, you hear in the background, you hear my industrial machine. I'm going to be making the cover with the industrial machine, and then I'm going to take it back to her and she can finish the project for a birthday present. Here's the general design idea for the finished ottoman cover. I'm going to walk you through the steps so you know which pieces I'm sewing while I put it together. Katie has cut 2 pieces of fabric that will cover the top pad, which is 3 inches thick. It will be wide enough so that our remnants that we're using, with a seam down the center, will cover the whole pad with corner notches. The final dimensions, once I sew the 2 pieces together, will be 52 3/16 inches by 35 1/4 inch. This will accommodate the wraparound for the sides, the 3 inches, plus a 1/2 inch seam allowance. After I've created the cover for the pad, then I'll attach the skirt to the bottom. So I've got 2 pieces, 2 remnant pieces, cut to length, the 52 3/16 inches. And then, since the selvage is not ripply, I'm going to use the selvage side of the remnants to true up the center seam, because I know that this side, the selvage, is perfectly straight compared to the off-cut side. Since the selvage is about 1/2 inch, I'm allowing for 1 inch seam allowance so that I don't get any of the selvage showing after I stitch the seam. And this is just a guide set at 1 inch. So you can see that I did not include the selvage as part of that stitch or seam allowance. The next thing that I need to do is make the notches in the fabric and then stitch the corners together. So the notches are going to be 3 inch notches on each corner, but I also have to trim this now that I have the center seam, because now I have a big enough piece of fabric to make this rectangular shape, and then I'll cut the notches out later. Okay, this will just allow me to true it up a little better. That's why I'm folding it in half and then in quarters. Because you can see it kind of shifted a little bit. So my final narrow measurement, the smaller dimension of the rectangular coffee table, is going to need to be 35¼ inches. So half of that, since I have this folded in half, is 17 5/8. And so I'm just marking that along here. And then I'll cut it, and then we can start cutting the notches in. Alright, so while I have all these layers, all the corners stacked on top, all 4 stacked on top, I'm going to just pinch these all so that they're all evenly stacked, and then I'll just cut the notch out, and then I can sew all the notches shut to make my kind of box or bag for the foam to sit inside of. So I'm just putting these clamps on here so that it doesn't have a tendency to shift, and I'm going to cut a 3" by 3" notch out of this, and this just happens to be a 3" wide ruler, so I can just mark it on there and cut it off. Now it has this general shape. I'll just unfold it. Take all the clamps off. And now I'm going to fold each one of these with the fashion fabric or right sides together, and I'm just going to stitch 1/2 inch seam allowance in so that when I pop them open, they're like a corner to cover the foam. You want to make sure you leave tails on your machine so that it doesn't unthread itself. And a small little bit of advice: if this little thread tensioner, I don't remember the exact technical name for it, is not all the way up, it's going to have a tendency to rip all your threads out of your machine and you'll have to rethread it. So this is why I'll pull a long tail of thread out and then roll the needle to come up a little bit more so that this is in its highest position so it doesn't unthread your machine. And that works for any machine, it's not just industrial machines. They're just more terrible about doing it. Two more. Kind of reinforcing the end because that side gets snipped, and so if it starts coming apart it'll be really hard to fix it. Alright, let's see what it looks like. Alright, almost there. Okay, there it is. So I'm going to now sew so you can see the corners. So the foam will get covered with this, and then I'm going to sew the skirt on. And so first I need to sew all the different pieces. So I have two short skirt sides and two long skirt sides. So I'm going to make a big loop of fabric, and then the seams for each edge of the 4 pieces of skirt fabric will align with each one of these corners on the cover. Let's get started. Again, right sides together. I have a short skirt piece being connected to a long skirt piece. So you can see that one's much longer than the other. Now I'm going to show you a trick. So I don't have to keep snipping my threads every time. I do a back stitch, I reverse and then come back, and that's set the stitches on that piece. And now I can just butt the next piece of fabric up to what I just did. So I have a short one and a long one. The right sides are together. And I'm just going to go straight on to the next piece. Now, you can do this on a regular home sewing machine too. So you just have to make sure you do the little back and forth stitch at the beginning to lock your stitches. Just a little easier on a walking foot machine, that's all. Now I do need to take it out so that I can reassess my long, short, because it needs to alternate all the way around. Short. And then I need another long, short. So just gotta make sure that that is the alternating pattern. Which is what I have. Okay, so another seam. Then you just close the loop. So we have a 46 and 3/16, a 29 and a quarter, a 46 and 3/16, and a 29 and a quarter. So we've alternated. It's really good to check that before you have to seam rip it. Okay, so my math was right. I don't know. It's just been one of those weeks where you think, wow, can I even math? So I have successfully cut the skirt and the sides to make my cover for the foam at the correct length. So they match. The seams on the top box piece match the lengths on my skirt. It's very exciting. Okay, so now I'm just going to sew the right sides together. So here's my skirt loop, right here, and then here's the giant box piece that I'm going to sew together. Doesn't look like much now, but once it actually has foam in it, I think it'll make way more sense. So you might be wondering how I am going to lay the seam allowances so that it lays flat. In general, I'm going to lay the box or the foam cover portion. I'm going to lay the seam allowance toward the small side of the rectangle. So they will fold toward the narrow side. The outside, since it's the skirt piece, I'm going to force it to lay flat when I stitch it, so that when I fold up the skirt on the end, it also is forcing it to lay open. And this will become, I think, a lot more smooth when it's put on the actual coffee table, and it'll make it a little more obvious to see what's happening. Also, this seam in the center, I'm going to also lay it as an open seam when I stitch over it with the skirt. And then I'm just going to work my way around with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Since this is kind of a just a little bit of a rubbery texture, I'm just holding it to stay open until the needle gets close enough to catch it. Also trying to keep my fingers out of the way, so I don't want to get my fingers sewed. It's just not on my list of things to do. Another little trick is that the feed dogs on the bottom of the machine are going to pull the bottom layer through the machine naturally faster than the top goes through. And so if you give a little tension on the top, it's going to naturally ease the bottom layer into the machine a little bit faster than the top layer, which is what I need to do because it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit gappier on the top than it is on the bottom, or on the bottom than it is on the top. Look at that, it's almost perfect now. This is a longer side, so it's going to be a little harder to match everything up. So you're probably not seeing this in frame, but I'm continuously checking my difference between the ease on the top and the ease on the bottom, and I'm pinching these seams together where I want them to match up. Because if I don't do that, I'm going to get to the end and it's inevitably going to be off by like up to 1/4 inch, because the feed dogs on the bottom again have a tendency to pull harder than the top. So by giving it some tension back, some resistance of pulling away from the way the machine's trying to pull it, is going to ensure that it kind of eases itself together so that it matches at the corners. Continuing to check that the seam is open. It does not want to lay open. On this side, the top is a little bit bigger than the bottom, which is like the worst case scenario. So I'm going to try and have the walking foot kind of ease it in. You see how I'm pushing a little bit of the excess fabric toward the walking foot? Running it a ways past, so I don't have to worry about it coming undone. And let's see how we did. Look at those seams. Nice. So nice. Okay, I'm trying to hold this kind of in the shape it will be on the coffee table. So the top part will be the part for the foam, and then the seam is where the top of the table will be, and then the skirt is the longer portion, and that will hang down to the bottom of the coffee table where the legs start. The last thing I need to do is just go around the edge here, since this is a raw edge, and fold it up 1/2 inch and then top stitch it all the way along. Thanks for joining me today on Dan and Sarah Makers. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. It's kind of an instructional video on how to make your own patterns, sew your own fabric covers for furniture, and I hope these videos inspire you to get out there and do something.